a long agenda. However, you made time to be here with us today. So for that, we thank you very much. I am Maria Givaraj. I'm a manager for global cooperation and training at ASTM International, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator today. We have a great lineup of speakers who will cover ASTM D13 on textiles, body measurements in regards to sizing, a topic, by the way, that ARSO has expressed great interest. They will also cover the use of 3D technology to design clothes that fit everybody, the process of African textile exports to the US, and the key standards that can boost trade under the AFCFTA agreement and the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, both currently in force. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to, on behalf of ASTM International, express my sincere gratitude to the African Organization for Standardization, ARSO, for teaming up with us today, as they have done in previous webinars and other collaboration areas. Our partnership, which dates to 2015, when both institutions signed an MoU, has indeed been great, and we are very pleased with the tremendous progress made to date. Before I invite Dr. Imogen Sengemana, ARSO Secretary General, to deliver his opening remarks, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. The first one is that we'll have 4 panelists, and I'm assuming the 4th panelist has already joined us in. And also, I would like to inform you that each panelist will have 25 minutes to present. Attendees will be in a listen mode only during the webinar. So please use the chat feature to submit any questions you may have. Please also note that interpretation from English to French and vice versa is also available during the entire webinar. So in order to have access to interpretation or the interpretation feature, we'll ask you to select the interpretation button in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. At the end of all presentations, we will have 30 minutes to answer any questions that may come in during the webinar. So please feel free at any point in time to send your questions through the chat box. So without any further delay, I would like to invite Dr. Imogen Sengemana, ARSO Secretary General since 2012, to start us off with the key address. Dr. Imogen holds a PhD in Analytical and Environmental Chemistry from the School of Chemistry, University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, and a postdoctoral studies from the University of Botswana. Beyond his more than 20 years of service to Africa, half of which in leadership positions, Dr. Imogen is known for his long-standing, clear track record and ability to deliver results. And I can attest to that, having been working with Dr. Imogen for over 2 years now. He's also known for his in-depth knowledge of quality infrastructure with a deep grasp of its major components, which include standardization, conformity assessment, metrology, and accreditation. Their interplay and how each affects trade and economies of nations worldwide. So with that, I could go on and on. Dr. Imogen has great credentials, which you can see on the slide before you. But with that, I will end here and give the floor to Dr. Imogen for the opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. And first of all, I would like to reiterate that our collaboration, ARSO and ASTM, since 2015 has really grown, and we are happy to be working with you. Sometimes I ask myself, when we even say talk about webinars, think it's just a meeting. Yeah, but probably there is a change that we should also have in the future and clarify. This came during these COVID times, and we think it's just a normal talk. Yeah, but I take this opportunity to say that this is a training. It's actually an actual training that participants learn about different things depending on the topics. Today, we have a very interesting topic, which is on textile. It's really one of the topic that we have a focus on at the continent. And under ARSO as an African organization in charge of standardization and conformity assessment, but also under the AFCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which actually also signed an MoU last year, November, on 17th November 2021, to see how we can work together in developing different value chain on the continent. When you look at the textile value chain, and actually when I talk about textile, I don't leave out even the leather value chain in the fashion industry. It's a very important area for growth for our continent, the fashion industry, or creative industry as a whole. The topic for today on body measurement. If I just recall the starting of shoes manufacturing, where there was no right shoe or left shoe. Imagine if today it was still the same thing, where you don't have a right shoe or a left shoe. It's unifoot, if I can call it. Yeah. We might be having different diseases due to the physiology of our different foot on at the global level. Today, the athletes themselves, they even go further and talk to industry to have well-designed clothes proper to the what they do, the work they do, the sport they participate in. But look at it now in a different way. That is just on health matter, on performance matter. Look at the value addition. The value addition in textile industry, when we start knowing that I am actually manufacturing clothes that fit some group of people. Yeah, group of people. Let me call it group of people. When you look at the size that we have at the global level, you will see UK size, EU size, American size, China size. We don't have an African size. And we should start thinking about this. If we want to grow this industry, to see how we guide the SMEs, the people in this industry to be able to manufacture clothes that fit our market. We are here to boost intra-Africa trade. If we can continue just wait for one person to enter our industry and you start taking the measurements, it will not work. We need to have measurement that can talk to our industry and know that I can produce in a bigger scale, and I know that the market I am producing for can use my product. That's very key, is value addition, and it's add-on the second part on targeted market. We need to target market, and we can only do that if we can resolve this issue of the size and on body measurement. The other part, it will also improve intra-Africa trade. It's entering the boosting intra-Africa trade, which is another priority on the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. And lastly, imagine how many jobs we will create if now we start producing at a bigger scale. Thank you, Maria. I just review with those thoughts while we continue discussing and being informed by different experts that we have on this panel. Thank you very much. I wish all of us fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mujin. I really appreciate your opening remarks. I think you helped give more context to this event, and also hope that the event is fruitful for all the participants here today. So I would like now to introduce our first panelist. Her name is Ellen Rualdi. She's a senior technical consulting specialist at the Bureau Veritas Consumer Products. Ellen is responsible for providing support globally for client initiatives and internal operations. This includes training clients and staff in testing theory and methodology initiatives and internal operations. So I also would like to add that Ellen is an ASTM designated trainer for courses on apparel flammability and children's sleepwear compliance, and she serves on several industry committees, including at the American Apparel and Footwear Association, also at ASTM International, as well as the American Association for Textile Chemists and Colorists, AATCC. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Textiles from Philadelphia University, formerly known as the Philadelphia College of Textiles and Science. With that, I will turn over to Ellen to share and proceed with the presentation. Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you, Maria. Can you see my slide? Hello, Maria, can you see my slide?
Yes, Ellen.
Okay,
I can see
good.
your slides. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I want to, I've been asked to speak with you regarding ASTM interface with the regulatory compliance of US markets. As you know, we have specific laws in place in the United States for compliance of textile products as they enter the US market. I am privileged for many years to participate in the standards development, and which may be related to a regulatory compliance action, regulation, guide, or becomes an industry practice for the United States for textile products. The ASTM D13 committee was formed to develop standards related to textiles in the US. As a standard organization, the participation reaches global representation. Our committee was formed in 1914 and is now has 605 members, 311 approved standards. We're working on new ones. We have new work items. There's 11 new work items registered, and we have 21 technical subcommittees. I am privileged to chair the Committee on Flammability, known as D13.52, and also the Labeling Committee, which is D13.62. Now, let's discuss the government agencies who monitor goods coming into the US for imported and domestic products, and all products must be compliant to specific federal laws for textiles. So the first agency I want to talk about is known as the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They are an independent agency in the US government. Under the consumer product safety laws, the agency is assigned to be responsible for administering all aspects of consumer product regulations, including enforcement, interpretations, and needed amendments. The focus mainly is for consumer products and is include but not limited to consumer product safety requirements, defining hazardous products, looking at flammability performance, just as a quick overview as it pertains to textile products. With regard to the Federal Trade Commission, known as the FTC, it is a litigating body that is authorized to enforce well-established laws, ensuring that consumers make informed purchase and use decisions about products and services that are on the market in the US. These are based on, all claims that must be based on truthful, non-misleading advertising claims. Deceptive and unfair practices are defined in the law. The importance of the net quantity statement or impression that a product advertising leaves you with is reviewed by the FTC. The need for substantiation of objective factual data is explained in the law. This pertains especially to special claims surrounding several of these products. So if you have a special claim on a textile product, for example, if it's wind resistant or water resistant, then these are defined as methods that have been established in order to provide factual data to support these claims. So just to give you a quick overview to who is subject to the consumer product safety enforcement, manufacturers, importers, distributors, and retailers are all responsible for any further products on the US market, and enforcement could be levied against any one of these areas relating to the manufacture and selling of consumer products. What is the subject's role? Fabric and garment manufacturers, importers, and retailers are prohibited from selling non-complying items, and retailers have been defined the same as importers if they import the goods directly. The law also states that the manufacture for sale, the sale or offering for sale or importation, any material which fails to comply with the applicable standard or regulation is prohibited. So a company must report within 24 hours of obtaining reportable information for any known hazard related to the product that you're selling. The Commission encourages companies to report potential hazards, even though their own investigations are continuing. If a company is truly uncertain whether information is reportable, the firm may allot themselves some time to investigate internally before reporting, but generally it's limited to approximately a week or so. Keep in mind that under the Consumer Product Safety Act, the CPSC may step in at any time and stop sale of a product for a known safety hazard. So even though there may not be a law established for a given product or a given attribute on a product, if there is injury or death due to a consumer product safety item on the market, then the CPSC can investigate it, stop sale. They can issue cease and desist orders to protect the consumer from purchasing additional product. So the CPSC, how do they find out about these hazards? First of all, and how do they monitor and enforce the regulations? That's one question. Like, how do they find that there is compliance to the law? So the CPSC conducts domestic surveillance. This includes importation venues, looking at manufacturing facilities. They can do inspections at retail. They can pull the product from the retail market. They can observe it at trade shows. Very often, if there's competitiveness in the market, your competitors may complain about your product if they find that you're selling something that could be a potential hazard. Product hazard reports should be filed by a company. If any company files a report against you, then it should be investigated. And the CPSC holds a database to review this data as it's incoming to it. In fact, I want to mention that if there is a hazard, especially a children's hazard that occurs, if a child is taken to a hospital and there's a reported injury known to be caused by a consumer product, then that goes into a NICIS database system, which feeds data into the Consumer Product Safety Commission for any injury occurred, so that they're constantly monitoring consumer product safety. I want to mention that the CPSC can work in conjunction with U.S. Customs and Border Protection and can target specific tariff classifications or invoice descriptions in order to monitor compliance to the law. One large area that we find in textiles that's continually monitored is drawstrings. One of the most highly recalled items in the United States is product with drawstrings, which we'll go over in a little bit. In addition to that, there is flammability hazards such as children's sleepwear, which is a target classification that they may look and pull more sleepwear items for conformity and look at records to confirm that the product is compliant to what's written in the law. I want to mention also that the CPSC usually seeks voluntary cooperation in the case of a recall or a stop sale. They're not out to make money. Their main goal is just to enforce the law, and they want to work with the manufacturers to improve the product and or come to a resolution to remove product as needed from the marketplace. Now, the Code of Federal Regulations is a book where we have under Title 16, the regulations, the rules and regulations that pertain to textile products. Under Chapter 1, the Federal Trade Commission laws are found, as you can see here. Under Chapter 2, the Consumer Product Safety Commission laws are found, and these are found under specific acts. So, for example, the Flammable Fabrics Act is broken into many different regulations, and the regulations target specific areas. For example, 16 CFR 1610 is the law for flammability of clothing textiles in the United States. 1611 would be vinyl film, and so on. 1615 and 1616 are the laws that regulate children's sleepwear. So they're specific to the end product, and therefore they fall under the Flammable Fabrics Act. So the CPSC also issued in 2008 a new law known as the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. So I wanted to give you a brief explanation for this. The law pertains to children's product, and a children's product is defined as a consumer product designed and or intended primarily for children age 12 or younger. And the product is very specific because it targeted product that contained high levels of lead. So in this case, it also looks at the entire product, how it's manufactured, what the labeling and the intent and who the user would be, if this product would be recognized by children or used by children, if it had child appealing features then it would be considered a children's product. So a consumer product under CPSA, which is the Consumer Product Safety Act, states that any article or component thereof produced or distributed for sale to a consumer for use in and around the household or residence, school or recreation, or for personal use, the consumption or enjoyment of a consumer product in and around a permanent or temporary household, residence, school, or recreation. That's very long-winded, but it basically covers all children's products. Under this new law, there are several different sections of the Code of Federal Regulations that are cited. The first is coatings. Coatings that are applied to children's products, all children's products, furniture. If they have the wet paint must meet and not exceed 90 parts per million of lead content. And in this law, it does pertain to textile products. For example, if you have a button or a zipper, for example, the coatings on those zippers cannot exceed 90 parts per million. Under 16 CFR 1252, accessible materials on children's products cannot exceed 100 parts per million of lead limits. Moving on, the law also stated that under 1307, 1308, and 1252, children's toys and childcare articles cannot contain phthalates and must not exceed 0.1% of the phthalates shown here. Childcare articles, which are used to facilitate feeding, such as a bib, you would have a vinyl bib, for example, and or sleeping activity, these types of plasticized components cannot exceed 0.1% individually of the phthalates shown. Now, a component part is described as a part that can be tested separately. For example, buttons, snaps, wet paints, spray sampling, and component part certifiers have the same responsibilities as your manufacturers. So if you're sourcing these components, they are subject to the same laws as you are or before distributing or when distributing this product. A component part must be traceable back to the party who has tested it. So let's understand how this all came about. The law addressed an issue where a manufacturer made a component manufacturer made a material substitution, did not inform the importer, and all of a sudden, a product that had been passing for years became subject to very high lead detection by the substitution made on the component product. So the law addressed the traceability of those components into the finished product and also holds the certifiers or the manufacturers of these component parts to also be required to meet the law. Certifiers and testing parties in possession of a part that must take care and do and show traceability within its production system to prevent any contamination of the components going into your product. Due care does not permit willful ignorance. So you can't plead in case of a lawsuit, for example. You cannot plead ignorance. I didn't know anything about the law. It's your due diligence. You have to know and understand the law before you distribute the product. So moving on, under CPSIA, also a tracking label is required for all children's products. So your product must contain the location and date of production, some kind of identifier that's assigned by the manufacturer so that you can trace back the components going into that product. List any cohort information or any information that facilitates a specific identity of that product. So You have traceability records throughout your production so that you can individually identify the components that are in that product. For import, every importer or domestic manufacturer of a product which is subject to a ban, standard, or regulation that is enforced by the CPSC and imported into the US must be accompanied by a certificate. So you've heard the term, I'm sure, of a GCC or a CPC. This is an attestation by the manufacturer or importer of record that the product complies to all rules, bans, and standards that apply to the product. So if you have questions, please, I recommend that you reach out to your laboratory for confirmation of what these mandatory requirements would be for a children's product. In the case of a shirt, for example, if you have a top, not only do you have to meet the lead limits, the surface coating limits, and any kind of phthalate requirements, the tracking label requirements, but you also have to have all your children's products tested by a certified, approved, third-party test laboratory for children's products. So actually the laboratories listing is on the Consumer Product Safety Commission website. So if you have doubt if your laboratory is compliant or not, you can go to the CPSC website to pull up the approved labs. It also requires that a GCC or CPC must list those rules that it complies to on the certification statement. So you need to, in the case of a shirt, not only does it need to meet the ones just mentioned, but also it would require testing in compliance to 16 CFR 1610, which is a flammability regulation for apparel products. So certificates are issued by the manufacturer, importer, or private labeler and sent to the retailer or distributor through the line of distribution. And that at the time of import, customs can request this information at any time. Your backup records should be traceable and accessible at the time, if needed, at the time of import. So any testing results you have should be housed and maintained in the site so that it's accessible if needed. Now let's move on to the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is the umbrella law that provides the FTC the ability to provide surveillance and enforcement and covers textile products. So what are the laws that pertain to textile products? The first is 16 CFR Part 300, which is the rules and regulations under the Wool Products Labeling Act. Any product that contains wool must disclose the wool content for that product. And basically this law came into effect because people were having allergic reactions when exposed to wool. So it was mandatory that all labeling of wool, there's no exclusion. You can't list it as an other fiber on a content care label. You must disclose a percentage wool of that product. Regarding 16 CFR 301 and 303, these are the fur labeling laws and or the textile fiber labeling laws that exist in the United States. Basically, these laws address the proper labeling. They address the logistics of labeling. They also mention what the generic terms and acceptable terms to use for labeling of the fibers and that are found in your products. Under 16 CFR Part 423, this is the care labeling law in the United States. It is, they define the terminology, the use of wording, logistics of labeling. They also point out the ASTM method for reference of care label symbols. So it'll point to an ASTM method for the proper symbols to use. So now that we've discussed some of the main agencies and how they regulate textiles in the US, I want to discuss also the connection of ASTM to these laws. ASTM provides methods and platforms for the development of standards that support the compliance of these laws in order to evaluate defective and hazardous products. In addition, the development of these standards are the participants include industry experts, educators, industry groups, and government agencies for the development of the standard. In 2016, I believe it was, there was a law signed saying that the regulators could participate in the standards development and given voting rights. They can also hold chair positions if needed for the committees or subcommittees. So they're very actively involved. They participate, for example, in my Flammability Committee, AST, or the CPSC participates and also has persons attending the meetings so that they can participate directly in the meetings. So let's first discuss ASTM D13. This is the Flammability of Textile standard. Originally, this standard was known as the Flammability of Clothing Textiles, which was a commercial standard known as 191-53. The CPSC worked with the industry to develop and document the method for testing, known as the ASTM D13 method. This was codified into law in 1975 and has been used ever since. At that time, the method was adopted into law and has been enforced and was also included in Canada law. So Canada also adopted this method, as has other countries. So the other countries that also are included are Sweden, for example, Netherlands. They all reference the ASTM D13 standard. So I want to mention that the most current edition of the standard, which is ASTM D1230-17, this method has been updated to include new dry cleaning solvents that is outside of the scope of the law. So when you look at the standard, also consider the year that it was written, because there may be industry updates in the standard and the law has not necessarily caught up to the standard. So, but the law will directly direct you to the older version if it were written into the law. In this case, under 1610 took the method, placed the method in the law, and actually that's the method that you have to follow for legal purposes. Any updates to that will be made as there are reviews by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They do every 5 years, I believe it is, that they will update the laws and do a review process by sending out letters of request to the industry to provide guidance and also to provide any kind of questions where the law is not clear and they need to look at and update the law. So this is the flammability chamber. I just put this in here just so you could see. The law itself will include interpretation. So in the case of a law, whereas a method may not include the interpretation, in the case of a law for clothing textiles, clothing and fabrics are classified by class 1, 2, and 3 for acceptability in the US. The testing looks not only on the length of the burn, but also how the burning occurs, if there's base burning. So criteria for class 3 fabric, which is illegal for sale, you cannot have a base burn, a surface flash base burn condition. Moving on, let's talk about drawstrings. Drawstrings, the CPSC reached out to textile experts to help develop an ASTM standard. And that standard then was eventually codified as 16 CFR 1120. The original standard was developed under F 1816, which is the ASTM reference standard. Now this addressed issues in the industry where the actual product with a drawstring hood was caught in several school buses, and children were dragged to death, not knowing that the drawstring had caught in the door as the door closed and the bus had pulled away from the bus stop. It also, there were some strangulation hazards too found with children on slides where there's a seam at the top of a slide where the slide is connected to the ladder, and a child may be sliding down a slide and the actual drawstring would be caught at the joint connecting these two pieces of the slide. So as a result, the drawstrings became known as a noose around a child's neck. To eliminate the hazard, the CPSC stepped up and collaborated with ASTM to develop the federal law, which is now known as 16 CFR 1120. The drawstring definition under the federal law included a non-retractable cord, ribbon, or tape, or material to pull together parts of the upper outerwear. Ties, on the other hand, were known as a string, cord, tape, or ribbon, or sash used for fastening that garment. Outerwear was also defined in the standard as that was the scope of the regulation. So clothing such as jackets and sweatshirts that are worn on the exterior of garments, and this includes lightweight outerwear. This would be considered to be a hazard in the United States. So with that, along with that, at the same time, there was a couple states that had also come up with restrictions that went above and beyond the scope of the federal law. So there is a suggested practice to cover all the states and the federal law. So all children's clothing in sizes 0 to 16 cannot have hood or neck drawstrings or ties for upper outerwear. All other clothing, no hood or neck drawstrings are allowed. So there is a difference between the drawstrings and the ties. For waist and bottom drawstring and tie requirements, the best practice for US is that all children's clothing, both upper and lower clothing at the waist, the waist should be limited to 3 inches of drawstring outside the channel when it's pulled to its fullest width. Toggles, knots, and other attachments should not be at the end of a tie that it could get caught. And then the drawstring should be sewn at the midpoint to prevent cinching of the drawstring through the channel. Also, F963, which is the toy standard in the US. This is a standard that was developed for by ASTM, which went above and beyond what was outlined for applicable hazards to toys. Now you're asking me why I'm talking about toys. In the case of the US, the softlines industry has basically adopted the toy methodology and applied it to clothing garments for components on children's clothing. And the reason being is there's been known potential hazards. So it's an industry practice to test for components on children's garments. The first and foremost one, when we're testing for this, let me say that you're applying a use and abuse test to determine if the component will release. And once you've applied the use and abuse test, then you will determine what the hazard is. So in this case, this is a use and abuse test that is being applied to a zipper pull. And in this case, if it releases, then it would be evaluated for the hazard. So any graspable component that's accessible to a child on a garment should be tested for safety reasons. So if you have a torque and tension and it passes, then it would move on to tension where you're actually pulling the component. Studies have shown the force to apply would be 15 pounds with a 10-second hold. That's what a small child can do. And if the component releases, then it would be placed into a cylinder, as you can see here. In this case, the cylinder shows whether or not that component could fit within the esophagus of a small child. So the diameter of the small part cylinder shown here duplicates the esophagus. Some components to consider would include things like rhinestones, rivets, zipper pulls, buttons. There's chunks of fabric also. So this goes above and beyond the toy standards, and it's in an industry practice again. What the hazards that we're looking for are choking hazards, aspiration hazards, sharp points and sharp edges. So in the case of hazard testing, we look at the component. If it releases, then we will apply a sharp edge tester. What you see here is a sharp edge tester with a toy. However, the same rationale would be done for clothing textiles. It applies to product intended for children up to 96 months of age, and a force of 1.35 pounds is applied to determine if that component part could lacerate the top layer of your skin. Sharp points are also a consideration. This is a sharp point tester. It has a gauging slot in the bottom of the tester. If you have a sharp point, such as this hat had a wire that was threaded through the brim to keep its shape, this wire came loose and could be inserted into this tester. As you can see here, it would be inserted into the bottom of the tester. If it lit up, it meant that the point could go to the depth that could lacerate the child. So as a result, it becomes a sharp point. Let's move on real quickly. ASTM also developed care labeling guidance. So there is a standard known as ASTM D13.55, which is the care label symbols. The FTC enforcement policy points to this standard directly in the law, but it references an older standard, which is a 96C version. It is public domain, so you can access it at any time. It defines what the washing, bleaching, drying, and ironing and professional care instructions would be for symbols. It provides a comprehensive system of care symbols and to reduce the amount of language on a label. If, however, you have cautionary statements that are not defined in this guide, then you must list them in English for the consumer to properly care for their product. Care labels, it also discusses the logistics of care labeling, that labels must be attached permanently, remain legible for the useful life of the product, that they must be found easily to the point of sale, and if labels cannot be visibly seen through packaging, care information must appear on the outside of the packaging at the point of sale. So I already mentioned this. This is mentioned as ASTM D13.55C, 96C. This is the equivalent of the ISO 3758. But the symbols are different. So be aware that the US has their own symbols that are different from the ISO version or Genetec's version of symbols. This is the guide that was put together and is found in the 96C- version, and it is 2 pages long. It defines the symbols, the interpretation of the temperatures that are associated with those symbols, and additional care instructions of when not to use. So there's cautionary statements that are required by law if you know that there's a certain care instruction that is not allowed for that garment and could cause damage. And this is just more of the same. Okay. It's a responsibility of the manufacturer importer to provide the correct information on the label, and the care label shall be visibly and permanently attached for the useful life of the product. So real quickly, ASTM also under D13 has developed evaluation guidelines for specific end-use products such as dress shirts. The practice covers the evaluation characteristics of launderable dress shirts and sport shirts. Any item may be evaluated using this practice, but it's not limited to what's just in the practice. This is just a baseline for you to reference as what is commonly done as far as testing for a given end product. The standard also will point you to specific methods and methodology and performance criteria that may pertain to such an item. So if you're developing a protocol of tests, this would be a good reference guide to go to for information of the methods and methodology that may pertain to your product. It also can give you specific guidelines or evaluation procedures to follow, such as defects, appearance, types of ratings for these types of products. And because we're talking about evaluation procedures, that leads you to methods. So for a method of test, the methods are have been developed and reviewed by the industry professionals to develop standard methods of testing. One such test method is known as 1683, the failure of seams. As you know, a seam can have several modes of failure. One would be seam slippage. The other would be a sewing thread break or a fabric rupture at seam. This method will tell you it will give the manufacturer the basis for which to choose a seam for manufacture. So if they're developing a seam type for a given product, you may use this method to determine the best suitable seam for a given product. So it defines what seam failure is, a point where any external force causes rupture to the sewing thread. Ruptures of fabric causes seam slippage or a combination of them. Needle damage is the severance of the yarn or fusing caused by needle passing through the fabric through sewing. So there is definition given to any of the methods. So my recommendation is to first look at the definitions, look at the scope of the method to determine if it's most suitable for the attribute that you are reviewing. In this case, they define seam strength and seam slippage. Seam slippage is the shifting of yarns near the seam. Even though the seam is intact, it leaves an unsightly seam and an undesired seam construction. So therefore, it gives the manufacturer the opportunity to improve those seams. And it also tells you how to calculate and report data. So with all our methods, they are supported by precision and bias statements. They've been tested out and used in the industry for years and are repeatable both between laboratories and inter-laboratories. So there's been precision and bias data to support the methods. So I move on, and I want to thank you for joining me today, and I want to thank our group for having the ability to participate. And I will take questions whenever you need. So I'm moving on. Maria, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. That was a very insightful presentation. I like the way you introduced the ASTM D13, and also you touched upon the issues surrounding the compliance rules and regulations pertaining to the textile industry in the United States, and the regulations surrounding the importation of textiles in the United States. So thank you for that. Please visit the chat. There's been quite a number of interventions or comments made that I would like you to address maybe at the end of all the presentations. With that, we're going to move along. We actually running a little bit out of time. So with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Dr. Candidate Abisadi Adenubi, the founder and CEO of Heritage Apparel, a textile and apparel production company based in Ogun State in Nigeria. And this company has the mandate to create a sustainable world-class production facility serving the apparel needs of various industries, nationally, globally, regionally, and globally, whilst creating employment, contributing to capacity building in the industry, and showcasing the rich cultural heritage of African textiles. I won't give a long bio because you have it before you on this slide, but just to mention that Dr. Abisadi is a lawyer by trade, or by training rather, and she has quite a resume, including voluntary work that she has done in various parts of the world. With that, Dr. Abisadi, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to you all from Nigeria. Yes, thank you for having me today. I will just dive straight in the interest of time. So I think that this is a really important discussion that we're having, because what we're seeing is that there's a huge sort of increase in terms of demand for fashion products from the African continent. But one of the issues that we're finding, or that we're having, is this issue around standards. And so I'm really going to base my talk this afternoon on sort of, on the ground issues from a manufacturer perspective. As has been mentioned already, I run a garment factory in Nigeria. And so I'll be sharing from some of the practical issues that we have around standardization, body measurements, and also sharing my thoughts on how we can begin to move forward and transcend these issues. So my journey into manufacturing really started about 12 years ago now, in 2010, when I set up a garment factory. I beg your pardon, I set up a fashion label. I run a garment factory now. I set up a fashion label that was co-founded by myself. And at the time I was doing the designs, but production was outsourced to India, to Thailand, and other parts of the UK as well. And I remember saying to myself, we have so many tailors in Nigeria. Why don't I sort of, carry out research into working with textile and garment production companies in Nigeria? And so I started trialing moving my production to Nigeria from Asia and from the UK. And instantly standardization was the big issue that I faced, because we have had a very bespoke and made to measure approach to producing garments. And we haven't really made that switch to mass production yet in a sustainable way when it comes to the standards and the sizing that is applied. And so what you often find is, you would have your measurements, give to your tailor, it will be perfect on one occasion, but the same measurements would yield completely different results on a different occasion. And that's really because of the, of the patterns that typically are not used in that way. And so I realized that a lot of the tailors were not accustomed to working with patterns, and working with patterns really is the bedrock of mass production. If you don't have good patterns, you're not going to end up with a good product. And of course, body measurements are a massive prerequisite to getting the pattern construction correct. And so what you would then find is that the size and fit of a garment are heavily dependent on the accuracy of the patterns, on the body measurements and the body sizing that is used. So it all really ties into the other. And what we've found is typically many African countries have used European, mostly UK sizing, and increasingly there are calls for an African standard sizing to use, in the sense that because we're now finding that the world is really hungry for Africa's cultural goods, fashion included. And so we're having a lot more brands that are developing and that are springing up from the continent to, I guess, complement the more sort of high-end bespoke fashion brands that we'd seen previously and previously sort of dominated the fashion scene. And so what, like I said, so what we're finding is, we're having a lot more fashion brands that are up and coming and that have increasing demand from not just Nigeria or not just their own specific countries, but other parts of Africa and other parts of the world as well, thanks to social media and the internet generally. And so, like I said, there's an increasing sort of call for an African standard sizing. And, there are other experts here that would, sort of break this down a bit more. But from my perspective as a manufacturer, that would really entail a number of different, requirements, a number of different, elements or aspects to be taken into account. Firstly, we have to obtain these body measurements. Right, and I know that many countries have gone before us in terms of carrying out national surveys for sizing, but it's a project that would really have to be taken on board if we're to start coming up with some sort of non-European or non-Western sizing for the continent. So surveys will be required in terms of the gender, the heights, the different shapes of people, and then secondly, we would have to really begin to statistically analyze these body measurements to be able to come up with some sort of metric or some sort of uniformity in terms of developing those body measurements further. And then of course, when we manufacture clothes, there always has to be a base allowance, some sort of ease in terms of the garments. Again, a technical approach would need to be taken to be able to allocate the relevant sort of, give and base allowances into different kinds of garments. And then fourthly, of course, then begin to formulate the different size charts that will be required for children, for women, for men, and so on. And then of course, finally, fitting trials would need to be had to test these size charts that have been developed. And so I think that when we're talking about, starting to come up with a, non-Western sizing or, set of body measurements or standards for body measurements for the apparel industry, these are a number of things that we need to begin to create the environment for. And I know that ARSO is really the body that is tasked to be doing that. So from my perspective as a manufacturer, these are sort of the things that would really help us as manufacturers to do our job better. Because again, I truly believe that for us to really make significant progress in terms of the fashion industry on the continent, then some of the things that we need to do is to really begin to produce a lot more, to produce in higher volumes. And to produce in higher volumes, we need proper standards to be able to do that. So that's really an area of importance that we're seeing in our business at the moment. Now, I guess we can't really have this discussion without, bringing in technology into the mix or into the discussion. And and clearly technology will be supremely beneficial in this process of beginning to create, standard size charts for the continent. And, over the past, say, decade or so, we've seen more and more increasing the use of 3D body scanning. We've seen, other sort of, imaging technologies that can take many more measurements than manual methods. And this, and I feel like, that's been a really great, it's been a really great, sort of development in the industry for us, because that allows us to do a number of different things. It allows us to be able to, if we begin to sort of, follow up on these technologies, it allow us to create proper standards for apparel produced on the continent. Because one of the issues that we have in terms of export is, again, the issue of sizing, the issue of proper standardization. Let a size 10 be a size 10, let a size 12 be a size 12. And they're typically sort of variances or variations that make some of our products not as marketable as products produced in other countries. Again, something else that we've been seeing the rise of is mass customization of garments. So sort of like a halfway house between made to measure and bespoke, and also mass production, whereby, with the use of technology, we can have a situation whereby people are able to customize garments that were produced for mass consumption. So for example, if you had a standard dress and you had this technology, you would be able to, say, choose the color of fabric that you want to use, to choose, the particular sizing that would apply to you, and then order from, say, a website, for example. So we're seeing a lot of that beginning to happen. But again, we would need to really get to the heart of what sort of sizing would be used. Otherwise, we would face the same issues as we currently face with just sort of, regular e-commerce for fashion items, whereby sizing is usually, an issue in terms of a really high rate of return in some cases. And then I guess also one of the other things is the fact that we would also, having virtual try-on systems. There's a huge conversation being had around reducing waste within the fashion industry, making the fashion industry more sustainable across the entire value chain. And one of the areas in which, that sustainable angle is really brought to bear is around the waste that is generated in the industry from a production perspective. And so the idea is, if we begin to tap into technologies using virtual try-on systems, then the production units are better able to create samples digitally to now then sort of avoid the need for wasting either when it comes to sampling or at the production stage. So these are a number of different things that we can use technology for when it comes to standardization, at least within our factory. Now, having sort of discussed all of this, one of the critical issues that we've actually had to be grappling with really around, so we talk about having sort of, African sizing, for example, but is there, how do we want to create a sort of universal size, right? Because I think that, having or sort of moving towards a system where we're trying to achieve a universal size really brings about its own challenges as well, which is the fact that, there are different body types and body shapes across the continent. And so how do we then sort of, begin to achieve some sort of standards? And some of the ideas around that would be, again, as already appears or as already happens or applies with Western brands, different brands sort of adopt different sizes because they have their different target markets and different sort of clientele that they're looking to target. And so what tends to happen is, different brands would target, a different sort of segment of the market. So for example, like a Zara, their typical target audience is really younger people, and so the sizing that that a company like Zara would use would be very different to another brand who was using or who was targeting older women, for example. The sizes will be typically more generous, and so on. And so the idea is really around, as we begin to think about these standards, also really think about the potential issues that we want to be able to sidestep and sort of, work around, so that we now then sort of end up with, different sort of body charts or body standard, or like, body type standards that are kind of more diverse. So that's really, where we've been at from a sort of body measurements perspective. Now, of course, that also feeds into the entire discussion around, exports. And for example, like using AGOA to be able to get more products into the US under the, under that trade agreement or the policy that we have. And I think that one of the things that we've seen is really around sort of, non-tariff barriers being one of the issues that has, I guess, reduced the efficacy or reduced the number of, brands who've been able to, exploit the agreement really well. Because if you have these sort of, non-tariff barriers such as, quality conditions or quality requirements or standard requirements that, say small brands might not have, then it becomes really challenging for them to begin to play or to operate in that space. So I think I'll leave it there for now. And if there are any questions, happy to take them. And then, we can sort of pick up on any specific points in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adenubi, for such an insightful presentation. Your African textile manufacturing perspective is indeed a very compelling story. We truly appreciate, and I can't thank Dr. Imujin for highly recommending you to speak to us today. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to move on to the next speaker, and the next speaker is Mr. Abel Kamau. I'll ask them to, thank you. So, Mr. Kamau, I won't go on and on with your bio, forgive me for that, for interest of time. But I want to say that Mr. Kamau works for the, I have Mr. Kamau for the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers based in Kenya. And Mr. Kamau is a manufacturing and industrial textile engineer and is directly involved in advancing a pro-manufacturing sector trade policy at the national and regional and global levels. I won't go on, but I will just hand over to Mr. Kamau to begin his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I would request that, I've been allowed to share my screen. So as noted by Maria, my name is Abel Kamau, the Trade Policy Manager within the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. So my presentation will be two-tiered. The first one on demystifying the market access to the US market. Then secondly, approaches to standardization that can boost trade within the African continental free trade area. Just as an insight, we are a business membership organization. So CAM, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, is a business membership organization, which is a leading BMO within East Africa. Our common mandate is to advance policy advocacy, and also by extension to also provide our members with demand-driven services. We have 7 chapters across the country, and have classified our members into 14 different sectors, which are distinctive value chains where manufacturers are operating in. Just to name, the textiles and apparel sector, and also the leather and footwear sectors are two of the 14 sectors, and they are sectors which I also handle directly under my portfolio. So we were established in 1959, and about 2 years ago, we celebrated our 60th anniversary. Just to note, our mission is to promote competitive and sustainable manufacturing, and vision to be a world-class business membership organization that delivers efficient services to its members. So looking at the Africa and the US market access perspective, It's worth noting, just as highlighted by previous presenters, that AGOA has been one of the key drivers of market access to the US market. So as at now, we do have 26 Sub-Saharan African countries that are accessing the US market through AGOA. And we are looking forward towards a post-AGOA agreement, either within an extension framework or a free trade arrangement framework post-2025, when AGOA comes to an end, the current AGOA comes to an end. Then for the other countries which are not party to AGOA, they have bilateral engagements and trade, both in form of trade agreements and arrangements with the United States, and this has enabled preferential market access to the US market. I think it's worth noting that one of the critical things that has enabled Africa to be able to have market access outside the continent is the use of free trade arrangements. And these has really been a key tool for market penetration, both in the US and the EU, and also in the Asian continent. So currently, the total textiles and apparels exports to the US from Africa is about 3.6 billion USD. So it's still a small figure compared to the huge volumes that the US is importing. And we are looking towards capacity building our members, and also coming up with good policy and frameworks to enhance the competitiveness of the African manufacturers. So currently within the AGOA arrangement, Kenya is the largest apparels manufacturer to the apparel supplier to the US under AGOA. And we are looking forward towards at least scaling up what we are currently doing, and also creating regional value chains with the countries which are neighboring to Kenya, just to ensure that we have a vertically integrated chain to be able to serve that market. So just to note, maybe under AGOA, one of the major things which has been a success factor are the special rules of origin for textiles and apparels under 8. A case in point being the third country fabric provision that allows a single transformation to happen within the AGOA originating countries. So as such, most of the companies within the region typically take the form of a cut, make, and trim. And but right now, with the current focus of speed to market and ensuring verticality, we are seeing more and more efforts towards having localized sources of raw materials, including yarns and fabrics from the continent. So the key standardization drivers for the African market access to the US, first of all, have been the industry-specific standards, and these are the mandatory requirements which are required by the regulatory agencies on the US side. I think some of the presenters, including Ellen, really gave a deep insight into these regulatory mandatory requirements by the US government on the other end. And this basically forms like the baseline for standardization and market access of textiles and apparel products into the US. Then secondly, a key driver of trade between Kenya, Africa, and the United States are the buyer-driven standards and compliances. So more often than not, you find that specific buyers come up with specific standards and compliances based on their brands and based on the value proposition that they are giving to their customers. So in most instances, it's common to hear of buyer-centric compliances and standards, which the manufacturers in Africa have to abide by. In most of these instances, you find that capacity building between the buyer and the manufacturer happens oftenly, and it's very common to find buyer representatives operating at least within the strategic sourcing hubs, just to ensure that there is continuous quality management and improvement in line with the needs. Then lastly, it's compliance support at both buyer and regulatory agencies levels. So specifically within Kenya, our Bureau of Standards has been of aid specifically around this. And this entails basically enabling companies to set up quality management structures to ensure that whatever raw materials that are getting into their facilities are in line with what the end market requires. And the processes that these companies have within their processes are also geared up towards ensuring that they have a quality output at the end. At the firm level, which is at the company level, the advancement of good manufacturing practices has also been a key driver to ensuring that the best of the best manufacturers are able to export to the US and other markets. And concepts such as total quality management, TQM, the house of quality, ensuring that at least manufacturers are able to have quality as a high metric and as a high priority within their business systems. Good manufacturing practices, including Kaizen and lean manufacturing, have all been able to ensure that our manufacturers are able to build a quality infrastructure and a quality system that enables them to access the export markets. Key to this is to ensure that whatever is done in-house within the firm level attributes to the success of the market entry level. Then lastly, one of the key things which is required from as in the industry as well is to ensure that there is continuous improvement and to have a learning industry. And because of these new developments within the global textiles and apparel sector are continuously being integrated into local manufacturing, which is geared up towards exports. Case in point being circular economy. And as at now, I think the players within the webinar acknowledge that buyers and consumers are continuously requesting for substantial content of recycled fiber. These are some that with regard to SDGs, so the environmental, social, and governance issues, which really touched on some standardization issues which are needed to be addressed, and these were just part of areas within the continuous learning and embracement of new developments within the industry that manufacturers have to continuously ensure that they are updated with. So linking this with the African continental free trade area, it's worth noting that ACFT is part of a larger ambition by the African Union enshrined in the Agenda 2063 of developing an integrated and prosperous Africa. And one of the key drivers that is expected to deliver this prosperous and integrated Africa is the African Continental Free Trade Area. And it looks at reducing the barriers to market access, including both tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers. So with regard to the non-tariff barriers, this is where the area of standardization really comes in handy, because more often than not, standards have been used either to facilitate trade and have been used technically also maybe as a barrier to trade. And as such, ACFT has a really good focus on how to handle the standardization within ACFTA. And in my next phase of presentation, I think I'll look at maybe some of the key areas that we could possibly look at within the standardization framework and infrastructure to be able to ensure that ACFTA delivers for the textiles and apparel sector. So just some brief numbers around the ACFTA. If you look at what the continent is importing in with regards to garments itself, it's about $7.67. This is as per the 2019 statistics. Just touching on chapter 61 and 62, and with regard to our exports, we do see that we have exports of about 9.82 billion, and this gives a marginal trade advantage, a positive trade balance. And this trade balance is largely influenced by what we are currently exporting to the United States under AGOA and other trade arrangements, and also what Africa is exporting to the European Union and the economic partnership agreements. So just based on this fact that at least Africa for once has a positive trade balance of apparels, it presents an opportunity at least for Africa to be able to serve its needs, learning from the key learnings that it has had in its export-oriented manufacturing. And as such, one of the key areas and one of the key objectives is to ensure that the successes which have propelled the export-oriented apparels and textiles manufacturing is translated into domestic manufacturing, at least to serve the African continent. With regard to trade facilitation and standardization, there are some key areas required, which includes the harmonization of standards across Africa. So as at now, there are various standards around textiles, around garments scattered across the African continent. Some of the regional economic blocks, maybe for instance, the likes of the East African Community, SADC, which caters for the Southern African region, and also ECOWAS, which serves the Western African region, have been working towards harmonization of these standards. And as such, one of the key roles that Africa needs to do within the standardization infrastructure is to ensure that we have this harmonization to make it easy for manufacturers to manufacture for the African continent. Second is the mutual recognition of the marks of quality from the Standards Bureau. This has also been at high level within some of the regional economic blocks. And we feel that at least when we have mutual recognition of these bureaus, it enables market access and trade and product penetration across the continent. Maybe case in point, maybe a product which has a mark of quality from Ghana, from the Ghana Bureau of Standards, should be able to access the Kenyan market, since the Kenya Bureau of Standards would be recognizing the Ghana manufacturer, the Ghana Standards of Bureau as a valid certifying body. Then thirdly, there's a need for trade facilitation and addressing any non-tariff barriers that may come up. So this is really common within trading regimes. And as such, the issue of standards should be considered as a priority area in the trade facilitation agreements. Then lastly, customization of some of the African standards to match the performance needs of the diverse demographics. My previous fellow panelist has talked about the need for sizing, which I think is a key concern for the African market right now, because of the diverse body metrics and body measurements scattered across the continent. Basically, I think the body economics of our West African vary differently from that of a South African, from that of someone coming from North Africa, Central and also East. Thus, there's a need for customization of these standards so as to be able to meet these diverse performance needs. And this needs to be done from a continental perspective without limiting trade in a manner that it facilitates trade but does not create a barrier to trade around the same. So some of the key market requirements, both for the EUS and also for the African continental free trade area, where there is some possibility and opportunity for cross learnings, includes the rules of origin, as noted earlier when I was talking about AGOA. We have the special rules of origin for the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which allows for that country fabrics or single transformation. This is one success trade facilitation tool. At least it has enabled the positive trade balance that we are seeing right now on textiles and apparels, as we relate it to the other products as well. So this is something which we could possibly borrow from each other and at least integrate within the ACFTA. Then other key areas that that are somehow similar, but maybe at times manufacturers and exporters maybe find it more complex when they are looking at markets which are outside the continent, are the key import and export documentations. And I think from our Bureau of Standards and also from the revenue authorities, these documents are readily accessible. Some of them includes the bills of landings, the commercial invoices, which are the basic standard trade facilitation documents. And these would be common between what is currently being used under ACFT and also AGOA. Specifically under AGOA, there's a requirement for an AGOA visa system, which ensures that whichever product is exported abides by the rules of origin and the agreements which have been set under the AGOA, under the Act, which includes things such as the minimum value addition, which should be done within an originating country, and the documentation which is supposed to follow any product or any consignment which is destined for the US. Most of the countries that are currently exporting to the US right now already do have an AGOA visa system, since it's a prerequisite for continuous access to the US market under AGOA. And as such, I think this is one system which mostly it's being provided by both private and public entities. And it can easily be taken up as a tool, as a good tool of ensuring that we manage quality and market access within the ACFTA. Other key areas which needs to be at the back of the minds of the policymakers and also the private sector within the African continent is ensuring that we embrace competitiveness and create policies which support our manufacturers to be able to produce at the least cost possible, but also at the most sustainable approach, so as to be able to at least meet the speed to market, which is a key concern right now. I think not many buyers are willing to give the long waiting times, meet the quality metrics. I think quality is not a compromise, not just for the US market, but also right now for the African consumer, and also at the volumes which are required. Ensuring that the right quantities are reaching the market for it to be an economic venture. Lastly, maybe as I conclude, a key requirement maybe from us as the private sector, working with our bureaus of standards, and also with our partners such as ASTM and also our public sectors, is to ensure that we do have continuous partnership, continuous capacity building between the private and the public sector, to ensure that at least standardization is taken up as a collaborative approach, not as a policing approach, more collaborative, to ensure that we are able to achieve the end game of trade facilitation between the public and also between the private sector and the private sector, just to ensure that at least there are peer-to-peer learnings between what is happening across different countries and different regions within Africa, and also what's happening in the rest of the world. And this, I think, makes such webinars which are being organized by ASTM really to be effective and instrumental in ensuring that we are able to create these key learnings between our various stakeholders within the continent and also the globe. So with this, I do appreciate the time that you've given, and I'll hand over this session back to Maria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamau, for demystifying Africa exports to the US, and also for highlighting the key standardization drivers as well as the market entry requirements needed to boost trade between the United States and Africa. This was indeed a very informative presentation. With that, we're going to move along, and we're going to have the last speaker for today's webinar, and her name is Jo Bradford. She's a senior partner engineer at Nordstrom, and she specializes on men's, kids, active, women, men, kids, women plus body measurement standards. I'll ask Dan to upload Jo Bradford's presentation, which I believe will be a brief presentation. Then, are you able to upload Joe's presentation?
Maria, it's saying that I can't share video.
That's fine. If you
I can't
cannot
share my
share,
camera.
that's fine. That's fine.
Because it-
Everybody has seen your picture on the flyer that we circulated, and I'm
Okay.
sure there'll be another opportunity.
Okay, because it says that you have, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm more concerned right now with the
Okay.
the slides that you're going to present. I'll ask Dan once again to put up your slides.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Dan, can you hear me? I'm going to unmute Dan. We can see you, Joe.
Hey, you
Okay.
see all my wrinkles.
Now we all getting younger.
Yeah, I keep saying that.
Yeah.
So I've been in the industry for 30 plus years working with ASTM for, geez, the last 20. And I'm just gonna do a brief discussion on the standard for body measurements for apparel sizing. And we could go to the first slide. It's very brief. So what our team members are educators, manufacturers, and industry specialists. Our committee scope is the development of body size standards for infants, little kids, gender-free up through size 7, big girls, big boys, young men's, big men's, Missy Petite, women's plus, to assist in the establishing a company sizing standard. So it's really a guide. For example, what our standard has as standard size 6 Missy straight, another company might use as a size 8, but it's a proposed standard that we've done a lot of research on. And our standard that backs up how we take those body measurements is the D5219, the standard terminology relating to body dimensions for apparel sizes. And this standard actually worldwide covers the points of measuring a body. And so it's a very valued document. Our standards for our measurement size ranges, those points of measure are defined in that D5219. And the individual standards that we do define, we give table as guidelines in inches, imperial, and metric. And we have the support from Alvanon Inc. They provide virtual bodies representing our size and shape of the committee's specifications in virtual bodies, and are presented in the standards as a front, side, back. And we've recently added a 3/4 view, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And it's been very good visualization. The other huge part is as 3D becomes more of the industry in developing the bodies and being able to see the virtual and fit virtually and pattern make on the virtual body. Alvanon's ASTM forms that they do produce also come in a BPI, a BIP, excuse me, so that you can also use that same body form that you're fitting on at the factory level, also virtually and to duplicate. And the next slide, we'll just, if you could go to the next slide, Dan. Oh, there it is. So, and our members, we collaborate on developing the standards. We use data gained from body scans and or also physical measurements taken from different bodies, and the use of industry expertise from members on a personal experience and knowledge within the industry. And we use studies being done on specific size categories that that information's wrapped together. And yes, a lot of it is US data, but we have also sliced and diced in comparing data gained from all over, much out of Africa, but Europe and the Scandinavian countries and Asia and India. And so we do look at that as how it has an impact on the standards that we are publishing. And we review an existing standard and discuss at each of our meetings that happens in, generally it's January and June, about where we are. Is there anything new? Do we need a edit or a revision? Are we still valid? The standards that are published have a 5-year life on the ASTM. And if they run at the 5 years and we're in development, that standard number can extend a year, or we can reballot the existing sizing standard to hold it while we're developing and gathering more information for revisions. And in the end, the standard goes through, if it's a brand new standard or with a lot of revisions, it goes through our subcommittee to ballot and discuss. And then once approved, it moves to the main ballot, and at approval, it is then published. And they're pretty quick upon the approval of the published. They publish within usually 3 months, if not less. We've had 8 weeks before, which is awesome. And so on the next slide, I'm just going to show you an example of a standard if you haven't seen them. And this standard is just an example of the body measurements. This happens to be part of the example of our newer young men's body. And along with this, on our next slide, I will show you the avatars that are published within the standard. And this is our front view. You can show the next slide. So this is representing the size standard on all the front views. It's in 2 rows because it gets too small in one lineup. And it's going from our basically 38 through our 48 in our chest in the young men's. And our next slide shows our side view. And then, so you can really get a visual if you haven't got the advantage of having 3D. And then our next slide is just showing the back view. So I know this was really brief and other people's presentations were more in depth, but I can answer any questions if you have any on these. Listening to you talk about the need for body shape and development of a size standard, it's the basis of our standards that we have, or still probably provide you a good use of the data in terms of the tables and how they're set up, and the virtual body shapes or hard forms that are developed may be different, but the measurement methods could still follow along with what our standard is and in the process that we have it in the lineup of the body measurements per standard.
Thank you very much, Joe. You did an outstanding job, in my view. I know your presentation was brief, but you touched upon the key aspects of body measurements as it pertains to this, as it was highlighted and it pertains to this webinar. So with that, we have come to the end of the presentations. All the 4 presenters have delivered and delivered well their presentations. And we now open the floor for questions and answers, answers from the panelists. I had reserved to the end to say that both the PowerPoint slides as well as the recording of this session will be shared with all the attendees. So with that, I will ask any of the panelists who have been also monitoring the chart to take or address any questions that came through. On my end, I don't see no questions except comments, particularly for the earlier presentations when Ellen and Dr. Adenubi presented. There's one about the sudden infant death syndrome that has been linked to inappropriate clothing for children. So if any of the panelists would like to comment on that, and also some children toys that contain chemicals such as the phthalate have been banned in some countries because of the hazards that they can cause. So these are kind of comments, not necessarily questions. Also, there is need for harmonized standards for textile, for medical uses, bandages, gauze, etc., to facilitate trade. So I'm just reiterating some of the comments that were posted on the chat. Ellen, I see you.
I have 2 things. Okay, so there's a couple things. I've not heard of anything specific for Sid's death, but we have had some activity in the way of weighted blankets. There's been some children's deaths due to weighted blankets, and these weighted blankets are used for calming a child so they can sleep. So if they're inappropriately used, there's been some deaths associated with these types of products. And mainly from my viewpoint and my opinion, some of these were actually misused. They were using an adult blanket on a child. So the weight may have been inappropriate for that child to be able to withstand it. And if a child is an infant, they can't escape. They can't necessarily roll over and escape if they are struggling in any way. So as a result, there is a committee formed, which I'm participating in, that is developing new guidance for these types of products. There's also a committee that has been formed to develop there's a lot of product on the market which crosses over to whether or not it's considered to be children's sleepwear or not. And those types of products are called swaddles. Some of them are forms of wearing apparel. Some of them are more just to zip a child into like a pea pod, for example, or just to wrap them similar to a blanket. So there's a committee that's now been formed to help develop more guidance in those areas. As far as other textile products, the US has recently banned bumper pads in cribs to prevent any kind of suffocation hazards that are associated with those. So that's just one comment I have. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ellen. I encourage other panelists to make any comments or anything they would like to add before we turn things over to my colleague and friend, I could call, because we do talk extensively about for capacity building at odd hours. So, and I'm talking about Mr. Philip Okungu, ARSO's Documentation and Information Manager, who will give us the closing remarks. So please feel free to make any comments before I bring in Mr. Okungu. Thank you. I see a comment. In many ways, there are much deviation between private standards and those made by NSBs, which stands for National Standard Bodies. Is it possible harmonize them or find a way to have a common requirement, because sometimes it's used as a barrier to trade? Mr. Kamau, would you like to address that? Mr. Kamau, are you still with us? Is anybody within the panelist list that would like to comment on that? Thank you, Dr. Adenubi.
I can comment on that. Excuse me. Right, so I think that it's really difficult to prevent private organizations from doing anything in particular if there's no kind of, if there's no sort of market or commercial incentive for them. And so private organizations like myself will kind of do what is in, will kind of subscribe to standards that will further our own sort of specific objectives. So for example, I think, so if you had, if you had a situation whereby, a particular organization is really prioritizing exports, for example, and then they would sort of lean more towards, towards standards relating to exports. On the other hand, if you have organizations who are sort of, trying to comply with sustainable development or like sustainable requirements, then again, that will sort of, impact on what sort of standards they then sort of, comply with. And so I think that it's really around, at least from a sort of SME perspective, it's really around being fully informed and fully understanding the full kind of array of standards that are required for the different objectives that private organizations have.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Adenubi. That was very insightful. We have a minute or so for a last minute question from the audience. Feel free to unmute yourself if that makes it easier. And then we will have Mr. Okungu give us the closing remarks. Well, it looks like all the presentations answered potential questions that the audience had. So with that, I'm going to turn things over. Mr. Kamau, I see you up.
Yeah, maybe just to comment. Thank you. Just to comment on the last last comment. stroke query by Johnson about the harmonization of private standards and the National Standards Bureau standards. I think maybe just to note, most of the private based standards are usually go over and above what the National Standards Bureaus propose. So I haven't experienced a situation where the private standards are lower, maybe set a lower benchmark as compared to what the National Standards Bureaus have proposed. So in most instances, I do agree that it leads to the development of barriers to trade. And this is best maybe approached during by manufacturers and their buyers, at least having bilaterals between manufacturers and buyers, just to ensure that a manufacturer is able to supply and manufacture what the buyer wishes. Because other manufacturers across the world are already doing it. I think it's usually a catch-22 dilemma, but what we usually propose from the private sector perspective is to ensure that we do have the development of a quality infrastructure, which is collaborative in nature. So it takes into cognizance the buyers, the manufacturers, and the regulatory agencies, so that whatever is proposed as standardization entry levels is well consented by the actors and is achievable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamal, for that. Truly appreciated. So we have come to the end of the question and answer session. I will now invite Mr. Philip Okungu, ARSO's Documentation and Information Manager, to give us the closing remarks. While he comes on, I would like to further reiterate that both the slides and the recording link, rather, will be shared among all the attendees of this webinar. Mr. Okungu, I see you. Thank you. Good to see you once again. Please, the floor is yours.
Good to see you too, Maria. And thanks to all the participants for this turning up for this wonderful event that we've had. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Secretary General, the African Organization for Standardization, to thank you very much for having spared your time at a very short notice to participate in this webinar series, which is a training, as had been alluded by the Secretary General during his opening remarks. We don't take it for granted, and we want to thank ASTM very much for facilitating this capacity building event. As you have heard, my name is Philip Okungu. I work for African Organization for Standardization, ARSO, as a documentation and information manager. We have taken a lot of time together with ASTM to organize this session. It is the second in the series that we have. For that, we want to thank ASTM very much for this opportunity and to accept to facilitate this need-based webinar series, because they were identified by the ASO members. I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists of today, Ellen, Dr. Denubi, Mr. Kamau, and Ms. Jobrando. Thank you so much. We appreciate your presentations, the wealth of knowledge and experience that you have shared with the participants. Most of all, I want to thank the experts, the participants from the ASO member states, the industries, and mostly the private sector for participation. As we know, textile is a good sector for the African economy, given our population and given the fact that we have resources in terms of, if we say agriculture, if we say cotton, and then also given the fact that we have a rising middle class in Africa. So it is a sector which can be targeted for the African industrialization, has already been highlighted under Agenda 2063. I won't take much of the time now. Time is over. We want just to appreciate. Thank you very much, and we look forward also to organize the second webinar session, which is also coming up, I think within the next month. Thank you very much on behalf of the Secretary General and behalf of ARSO. We really appreciate and grateful that you got your time to participate in this webinar. Thank you so much, and we look forward to continuous engagement with you whenever opportunity comes. Thank you so much for STM once more for this facilitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kungu, for your closing remarks. You did a good summary, and I join you in thanking everybody for being here. By the way, we had almost 50 participants, and I think it was a good number, good turnout. And like Mr. Okungu said, we continue to collaborate in hosting different capacity building sessions for both ARSO members as well as ASTM MoU partners. With that, I would like to ask you all to turn your cameras on, and I'll ask Mr. Dan Kitomi to take a screenshot to share this on the social media and other outlets. I think it was a great event, and I want to thank you for taking time to be here. Then,
I'm waiting for more of the team to be able to unmute so that.
thank you, Dan.
So this is just the last one I'm taking now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, and
Thank
have
you.
a blessed day. And thank you once again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.